August the 16th, 2022. We have an agenda before us. Are there any errors or additions or deletions? Councillor McGee.
I'd like to have a conversation around how the electoral boundaries are being proposed to be changed. I think we need to take a look at them and see if they're fair to us.
Alrighty, we will add that to new business 7.6, electoral boundaries, federal. Anything else? Yes, Councillor Christie.
I'll move the agenda as amended.
Alrighty, we have a motion to approve the agenda as amended. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Pre-circulated the meeting minutes of July 19th. Are there any errors, omissions? Deputy Reeve King.
I'll make the motion to accept the minutes of the July 19th regular council meeting as presented.
Alrighty, we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Alrighty, our first agenda item will be 5.1.1, Bylaw 1828. Welcome, Ms. Keever.
Good morning.
Anytime you're ready.
All right. This is being brought to you today because we finally have our, the Minister of Transportation finally signed our road closure bylaw for the Keivers Lake undeveloped road allowance. Currently, Keivers Lake Campground is comprised of 2 separate titles and some improvements which are located within the undeveloped road allowance. Sexsmith Surveys have provided a plan of survey consolidating the closed road allowance with the 2 separate titles which comprise the Keivers Lake Campground. On November 24th, 2020, Council gave first reading to Bylaw 1828 and the public hearing was held on February 9th, 2021. No letters were received in favor or opposition to the road closure and no comments were received from the required referral agencies. At that point in time, then we do send it to Alberta Transportation and we wait very patiently for the minister to sign it. Consolidating the road allowance and the 2 separate titles for the campground will bring the size of the campground to 17.64 acres. A real property report was completed and the measurements confirm that the campground office will not meet side and front property line setbacks. Once the road closure is completed, an application will be presented to the Municipal Planning Commission for a variance to Land Use Bylaw 1808. So your options today, I'm hoping that Council moves second reading of Bylaw 1828 to pursue the road closure and consolidation of the undeveloped road allowance between the northwest of 3125 west of the 4th and the northeast of 253126 west of the 4th, lying north of Keivers Lake, legally known as Lake Number 2. And then hopefully third reading as well.
Okay, does council have any questions for Ms. Keever? Go ahead, Councillor McGee.
I'm willing to make a motion if we're ready. I move that we give second reading of Bylaw 1828 to pursue the road closure and consolidation of the undeveloped road allowance between the northwest 303125 west of 4 and the northeast 253126 west of 4, lying north of Keivers Lake, legally known as Lake Number 2.
All righty. We have a motion before us to provide second reading. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. Call the question. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Deputy Reeve King.
So then I would make the motion that council give third reading to Bylaw 1828 as we have discussed.
All righty, we have a motion to provide third reading to Bylaw 1828. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Awesome.
And that is carried unanimously.
Sweet, thank you.
Okay, now we're going to call it Lake Number 2 from now on?
Pardon?
Are we going to call it Lake Number 2 from now on?
I kind of am partial to the name it has.
All right, we'll leave it as Keivers then. Okay, our next agenda item, 5.1.2, MPC meeting date change. Welcome, Ms. Hazelton, and anytime you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. We are just requesting that we move the MPC meeting in September to the 20th versus the 23rd. So Bylaw 1784, the Municipal Planning Commission bylaw states under conduct of business that the commission shall hold such meetings as are necessary to fulfill the commission's responsibilities. The Municipal Planning Commission currently holds their meetings on the fourth Thursday of every month. Council sets the dates and times of the Municipal Planning Commission will meet during the annual organizational meeting. The next meeting is scheduled for September 22nd, 2022. Administration is proposing that the date be changed from September 22nd to September 20th, which is a committee of the whole meeting date. This will allow the Planning Department to attend the Alberta Development Officers Association Conference being held in Camrose during that time. Administration is also proposing that the MPC meeting be held prior to the committee of the whole meeting so that we can schedule more appropriately for applicants on that date. And there are no financial or staffing implications with the recommended motion. So we are proposing that it is scheduled on September 20th to begin at 8:30.
Are there any questions from council to Ms. Hazelton? So we are proposing to start the MPC meeting at 8:30 and have the committee of the whole meeting after the MPC meeting
Correct, at 10.
at 10. Okay. What are, yes, Councillor Penner.
I see no problems with that. So I'd make the motion that council move the MPC meeting date from September 22nd, 2022 to September 29th, to September 20th to begin at 8:30 a.m. in the council chambers with the committee of the whole meeting to commence at 10 a.m. in the chambers as well.
All righty, we have a motion before us. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Barb. Our next agenda item, 5.1.3, amend land use bylaw 1808. And you're presenting, are you?
I am.
All righty.
So we've received a request for redesignation, and so this is, again, how we get it in the queue. So we want to request the council move first reading of proposed bylaw 1863, and then also schedule the public hearing. So BJ and Melanie Berg are looking to create two specific uses on the southwest of 163025 west of 4. They would like to redesignate a portion of their land to country residential district and another portion to recreation district. The remainder of the land will continue to be zoned agriculture district. The property itself is located just over 1 mile south of Linden, but is not located on a through road, so access is from Range Road 25-4 from the south. The first use would be an approximate 28-acre country residential development with 7 lots on lands in the southeast corner of the quarter that falls south of a watershed arm that flows into the Kneehill Creek. This land is currently pasture with some hayland, but with a CLI rating of 5, it is quite poor farmland. This land does fall under a level 5 significant historic site for archaeological reasons. So this application will require a permit from Alberta Culture and Status of Women as well. They are also wanting to redesignate a 7.2 acre area as a family retreat with some Airbnb cabins and a common kitchen assembly hall with potential for a few RV hookups. They will be utilizing some of the historic looking buildings currently on the site for this purpose. These buildings will be relocated further to the east of this property and directly south of the Kneehill Creek. This land is currently pasture land, and uses that would be allowed with these two proposed designations have been attached for your information. So you've got a bylaw 1863 that shows an image with the proposed locations that they are wanting to redesignate. And then you have the 2 districts that are listed, so you can see the uses that would be allowed should that be successful.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council to the planner? If we got a bigger overhead map that we could access, or just, I got a pretty good idea where
Yep, I will pull
proposal
one up here
is,
just
but
a second.
oh, so that's 25-4 right there. Okay.
All right, we'll just go toward this property right here. So here's Linden, and it would be this property. And as you can see, the road stops here, so you access via over.
All righty. Thanks, Ms. Hazelton.
No problem.
Councillor Penner.
Just a question.
Sure.
On the archaeological reasons. So that's on one of the other maps we have too, right? It shows all the different,
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was one right there.
Yes, so when we turn on the historic, you just find it here. Here we go. Basically, all of Linden and a lot of that area is historic resource. And because they've gotten much more prudent in how they look at these applications, they are going to have to go through them. Now, they may say it's fine because a lot of this is existing, but I imagine they're going to have to do something through them as well, just to get that permit approved. Usually they do a conditional approval, and if you find anything when you're doing any of the work, then that's what triggers them to look at that deeper, and whether or not you have to excavate anything you find out, or if any other bodies are involved. But there is quite a lot of land in that location that is historical.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Councillor Forbes.
I see that there's water there. If they're making that a country residential, will that be affected by properties being flooded out?
Oh, no, and those are things that we will bring up through the public hearing.
Okay.
So, yeah. Yep.
All righty. If there's no more questions, which I'm not stifling the question side of things, but if there are no more questions, what are council's wishes? Councillor Penner.
I'd make the motion that council move first reading of proposed bylaw 1863 for the purpose of amending land use bylaw 1808 by redesignation a portion of the southwest of 1630-25 west of 4 from agricultural district to recreational district, and another portion to country residential district.
All righty, we have proposed first reading for bylaw 1863. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? Yep, and that is carried unanimously. We've got one more motion. Councillor McGee.
I'd like to move that we schedule the public hearing as per sections 230 and 692 of the Municipal Government Act to be held on September 13th at 9 a.m.
All right, thank you. We have a motion to schedule a public hearing for the 13th of September at 9 a.m. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously also.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Our next agenda item, 5.2.1, cemetery policy. Something that we're all going to need, but not really want to do it immediately. Dying to discuss? Welcome, Shelby, anytime you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Reven Council. The item I have for you this morning is regarding the cemetery policy update. So the cemetery policy was created to provide guidelines around the maintenance and care of Kneehill County-owned cemeteries in accordance with provincial legislation. And as part of our regular policy review process, the cemetery policy with proposed changes is being brought forward for Council's consideration today. So just some discussion around this. The policy provides guidelines and procedures regarding cemetery plot restrictions, maintenance requirements, disinterment, and scattering of cremated remains. Benefits of having this policy in place includes that these spaces are maintained in a respectful manner and that Kneehill County-owned cemeteries are managed in accordance with provincial legislation. So I have included the updated or the proposed updated policy as well as the existing one in the package there. So what I was thinking I'll do is I'll just go through these highlighted proposed changes and just speak to those briefly. So under policy guidelines number 1, that's just changing the wording a bit. Under 4, just including in that 72 hours notice that it excludes weekends and holidays. Number 5, just adding as outlined in the mass rates bylaw. So again, just changing the wording a bit there. Under 14, so 14 refers to section 5 in the existing policy. And the reason why this has changed from in section 5 of the existing one, it states that within 1 year of subsidence of a plot, that would be the responsibility for filling it of the family or funeral home. And this is being brought forward as a proposed change because what we're finding is just that in cases where it may be a safety concern, that these can be dealt with more promptly by our crews, and oftentimes that if it is a challenge for that work to be completed by either the family or the funeral home, that our crews are able to respond to that. And additionally, sometimes within that year, just due to further subsidence or sinking of the plots, that our crews end up adding additional fill and grass seed as it is. So this would just address that by bringing that to completely in-house to be the responsibility of our crews, and then maintaining that consistent service level and consistency in the operations there. So that's why that change is being proposed there. Under disinterment 1C, just adding reference to the Vital Statistics Act. So just adding more reference to provincial legislation there. And then again, just changing the wording a bit under number 2 under disinterment, and then again under number 9. So some just minor grammatical changes overall, but then that section 14 is the one where there's just the most prominent change that's being proposed here.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sherwick. Is there any questions from council for Ms. Sherwick? Councillor Penner.
So by having this, this policy about, it doesn't eliminate, or does it? Because we had correspondence not long ago about planting some trees and community associations that would like to do something at their local cemetery. Does this eliminate that altogether, or you're just wanting them to make sure they work with you, with your department?
Yes, yeah, the latter there, to your question, Councillor Penner, that would still remain the same, that any vegetation must be approved by Kneehill County if it's to be planted within the cemetery.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So just grass seed, no daisies.
Preferably, yes. And approved trees and shrubs.
Okay. Deputy Reeve King.
So I know we had an issue a while back with a site where it had settled in that first year, and there was a debate about who was responsible, and we have no requirement for vaults, correct, in our policy? Like, they're not required unless it's a double internment.
Correct, yes.
Correct.
So for double interment, and that, yeah, yes.
So that settlement issue that we had not that long ago wasn't about a casket collapse so much as it was just natural settling, correct?
Yeah, and to your question there, I believe with that, the one that I believe you're referencing, oftentimes what we'll have with winter burials, particularly casket burials that take place in the wintertime, is often the soil layers will get admixed with snow if that's there, or they'll just get admixed in general. So then when the plot is closed, then in the springtime, what we'll see is significant subsidence that oftentimes we don't see in spring or summer. So what our estimation was with that instance was that was the case. There was a lot of clay that was left over on the top, so the soil layers were admixed, and that just led to more considerable sinking than what we'd see on a typical instance. But there's a level to which is kind of the average, and that often does exceed what was previously in the policy of that 5 centimeters. And again, our crews will often end up just topping up the filling of these plots. So this would just bring everything within our regular operations to make it more consistent.
Okay, so the issue we have with settling is usually within that early time frame. It's not at a much later.
That is what we've seen.
So, okay,
Yes.
so then consideration of using vaults is not necessarily that important.
Not necessarily with the single is what we've seen, but certainly with the double, and that's, I believe, what is the standard with provincial enactment as well.
Okay. All right, I was just wondering whether it's something that we needed to consider in the policy, was whether we made vaults a mandatory thing or not, so.
Right. Yes, and for single depth, typically we don't see that as much being a concern. But yeah, of course, certainly with the double ones.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Penner.
So just another quick, just to put it out there for the general public to see, because I've heard in the past that different cemeteries have different requirements when it comes to the concrete, but I've heard that even single in some had to have concrete, but that's not true. It's just when there's a double, there has to be concrete.
Yeah, with our current policy, if it's a double, then there needs to be a liner in place.
Does council have any other questions for Ms. Sherwick? Or a motion? Councillor McGee.
I'd like to move that we approve policy 2-1, cemetery policy as presented.
All righty, we have a motion to approve policy 2-1 as presented. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thanks, Ms. Sherwick.
Thank you.
All righty, our next agenda item, 6.1, the 2022 second quarter variance report. Welcome, Ms. Von Merbeck. Looking forward to your report. And anytime you're ready.
Good morning, Reeve and members of council. Today I bring forward to you the second quarter variance report. Council receives these reports 4 times a year. These are intended to provide council information in terms of how the county is operating in relation to the operating budget, operating projects, capital projects, and the purpose of this report is to also give some other supplemental information in terms of how the county is doing with their finances. This is a function of the balanced budget that we are required to adopt every year. This allows you to have some information on where we're sitting on there and also kind of think forward in terms of what decisions might come forward to you in the future. There are 5 appendices within this report. The first one is the operating budget by function, which is the one we will kind of mostly talk about within the scope of the operating budget. There's also one in terms of that relates to departmentally. We don't really talk about that, but it's provided for reference for council. There's also the project summary, which speaks to both operating projects and capital projects, the cash and investment summary, and a reserve continuity. So moving on to Appendix A, the operating budget summary by function. Overall, right now, so again, like is normal, we have the actual numbers to Q2, but then we also have our forecast out to year end. So when I'm speaking, I'm really talking about what our expectations are to year end, not just to what we did to the beginning of, or to the end of June. So right now we're forecasting a $1.6 million surplus. Now a huge portion of this relates to funds that we received from the province that weren't expected when we did the budget and actually relate to expenses that were incurred in prior years, which is why they weren't included in the budget as well. So with those taken off of that 1.6 million, our core operating surplus is looking at about 1.1 million, which is about a 4% variance on the operating budget at this point in the year. So in terms of revenues, we have an $880,000 favorable revenue variance projected to year end. Again, a big portion of this relates to revenues that we weren't expected to incur in the year. The first one being $206,000, which relates to a 2018 DRP flooding claim. And their motion 1 within this report is requesting that we contribute that to a reserve to protect against future potential disasters. The next big portion of that variance is $296,000, which is related to PERC credits that we received from the province. So these are amounts that were paid to the province for education requisitions related to tax accounts that we were ultimately unable to collect and which were written off in 2021. And again, motion number 2 in this one requests that we contribute those funds to the Revenue Stabilization Reserve for future use. Then within the actual core operating budget, there's a $34,000 unfavorable variance that relates to lower than budgeted water sales. Those are within the transportation department and have to do with oil and gas activity. And there's a $19,000 favorable variance in that line item that has to do with WCB reimbursements as well. Moving on to sales of goods and services, this one is actually really good. It's on our core budget, so these aren't funds that were unanticipated, but we have $236,000 favorable on that line. $161,000 of that has to do with dust control revenues. $40,000 has to do with water sales related to municipal water lines. Primarily bulk water had a lot of use this summer. That's the main driver of that one. $18,000 related to oil field inspections and approaches and crossings. $8,000 related to planning department fees, and $7,000 related to the sale of gravel. So those are all good things where we're kind of getting more revenues in those functions than we were anticipating. And that information will be reflected when we move forward to next year's budget and will be taken into consideration whether we can change those budgets in the next cycle. Penalties and fines is showing on budget at year end, but I just always like to flag that it's showing as a high variance in Q2 that relates to penalties and fines that have been recorded in our accounting software but aren't necessarily going to be collected. So that's something that'll get dealt with an independent report sometime in the later part of the year. Special taxes and frontage has a $46,000 favorable variance. This relates to riser fees that have been received. They're just over what was included within the budget. So we've had more connections than we expected. And return on investments is also a good news story. We're projecting about $105,000 favorable variance at year end. And this has to do with the prime interest rate going up faster than we even anticipated during the budget time. So all other line items in terms of revenues are in line with expectations and no significant variances are anticipated. Moving on to the expense summary, we're projecting a $795,000 favorable variance within expenses, and that's kind of a function of a few little bit pieces. Contract goods and services has projecting $189,000 favorable variance. This is across all departments, across many functions within that line item. There's really not one specific driver that can kind of make up that amount. It's truly just across the board. And that applies with materials, goods, and services as well. It's really across all departments. There's some cost savings around, and it's just, there's no primary driver within that line item. The big one is salaries and wages. We've had a little more turnover and a few more vacancies within the organization through the year than we were ever anticipating to have. So that's where that $445,000 favorable variance comes into play. And all the other expense line items are all within budget and within expectations, and there's no significant fluctuations that we are anticipating to year end. So that's the end of the operating budget.
Let me ask a question? while you go?
Absolutely.
Sorry, through the roof. When it comes to the PERC credits, is that all we're going to get? Did they pay? Okay.
Yeah, that's all the ones I think we got all the ones we applied for from my memory. So all the ones that we submitted on, that we wrote off a bunch at the end of last year, and we submitted those through, and they came all through. But there's no other pending PERC credits that we might get back from the province, not at this point in time at least. Are there any other questions before I move on to the project report?
I just have a comment when it comes to a WCB reimbursement. Quite often that means that the safety is at a high level. There hasn't been, and I'm hoping that's what's happened here. And I think that if that is the case, the departments need to be given the credit that.
And I think, I can't remember exactly, but yes, effectively that is what it is, that they charged us higher rates than they ended up needing to for the year. Anything else? Okay, I'll move on to the project summary. So currently we're undertaking 21 capital and operating projects at the county. So in this schedule, they're separated into capital and operating. It should be noted that all the operating ones are on the schedule before as well. This just gives you the detail of what's incorporated within that one line item. No projects are anticipated to be over budget. There's a few that we're thinking we're going to be under budget by the time they're completed, so we've projected that out. You'll get more details as projects actually get completed, and that information will continue to be updated during Q3 and then Q4 as well. And then I'll move on to the cash and investment summary. So again, we're doing fairly well in terms of return on investments this year, and that's a function of the prime interest rate going up. The 1% increase that happened in July is not reflected in this, but will be reflected on the Q3, so those returns are even going up even further. That has been reflected in what we're projecting our revenues to be for year end, but these numbers on that schedule will change a little bit for the better even more at Q3. And then the reserve continuity, this just reflects all of the operating and capital draws and contributions that were included within the budget. It also shows any post-budget approvals that have happened. And then that second last to the right column includes anything that we're projecting a project to be under budget by, because that will reduce the amount of money that we're pulling out of those reserves during the year. So overall, we're doing well within our budget, and we're on par with everything in terms of expectations. And that's the end of the information I have. Are there any questions?
Well, thank you very much for the thorough report. Are there any questions from council to Ms. Von Merbach? Deputy Reeve King.
So I don't have any questions, but just to say thank you. Appreciate the continued work that's being done on our financial side, and so
Thank you.
I'll pass that to you, and you can pass it down the chain.
Absolutely, I will. Thank you.
Yeah, it is appreciated. And I'll also make the motion that council approve a contribution of $206,934 to the Disaster Recovery Reserve received from the Disaster Recovery Program related to the 2018 overland flooding.
Okay, we have a motion before us to approve a contribution, well, as it's written on the screen in front of us. I'm not going to go through it. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Councillor McGee.
I'm really glad that we were able to make this motion. The council approved the contribution of 2009, excuse me, as the number shown to the Revenue Stabilization Reserve related to PERC credits received. Let's go the safe route.
All righty, we have a motion before us that we approve a contribution of $296,762 to Revenue Stabilization Reserve. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Councillor Christie.
I appreciate the information you gave us, and thank you very much. So I'll make the motion to accept this report as for information.
Okay, we have a motion to receive the report for information as presented. All those, okay. Any discussion to that motion? I see none. Now I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Great. Thank you very much, Marika. Thank you. And go get your calculator warmed up again. Oh, it already is. Yeah, I kind of figured it might be.
She has spares.
Spare batteries, yeah. Okay, our next agenda item is Bylaw 1860, repeal of obsolete bylaws, and that's going to you, Miss Vanderkool.
It is going to me.
You like getting rid of old stuff, eh?
I do.
Okay.
So as you're aware, we started the process of reviewing the bylaws and cleaning up the old bylaws that are obsolete and outdated. This is a house cleaning project that we are going through, so instead of having 1,000 of active bylaws, we only have the bylaws on the books that are relevant. The only way to repeal or amend a bylaw is through another bylaw. So what is in front of you today is a bylaw to rescind 10 bylaws. I'm not going to go through every single bylaw, but this meeting's theme is, again, purchase of land, gravel lease, and reclamation for weed infestation and expropriation. Reclamation and expropriation are now done under current provincial enactments and not done by bylaw anymore. So by removing the bylaw, it won't affect the expropriation that was done back in the 1950s, as land titles has the appropriate records. And as a side note, those expropriations were done on provincial highways, which are no longer counties' responsibilities now anyways. So if there are no questions regarding these bylaws, administration recommends 3 readings be read to approve this repealing bylaw.
Council have any questions for Ms. Vanderkool? Councillor Penner.
Just one, when it comes to the recreational property in Torrington. What is that, the playground, or what was that, do you know? On that block 1, however it went, lot A, block 1? Back in the day, sorry?
Yeah, I'd have to go through and find, but like repealing this bylaw is not going to affect that it's a recreation or not. It's just that because the land title will have Kneehill County if we still do own that property as the official land owner.
Okay.
So what's council's wishes? Deputy Reeve King.
So I'll make the motion that council give first reading to bylaw 1860, that being a bylaw to repeal obsolete, redundant, and outdated bylaws.
All righty, we have a motion before us to give first reading to bylaw 1860. Is there any discussion to that motion? Councillor Penner.
Just, it's going to be sad when we don't get to read about rods going forward.
Any other discussion? 1860. If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Counselor Christie.
Seeing as how my grandfather's signature wasn't on any of these bylaws, I'll move second reading of bylaws in 1860.
All righty, we have a motion to give second reading to bylaw 1860. Is there any discussion to that motion? And seeing as not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Would someone like to give consent to hold third? Councillor Forbes.
I'll give consent to do the third.
All righty, we have a motion before us. Oh, yes. For third, all those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Let the record show. Councillor McGee.
I'd like to move that we give third reading to bylaw 1860.
All righty, we have a motion to give third reading to bylaw 1860. Last chance. Any discussion to this motion? And again, I see none. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Okay. Thank you, Carolyn. How many of these you got left to do?
Oh, we're good probably till the end of the year.
All right. All righty. Does anybody want a break or do we want to keep on going? Looks like we're going. Okay. Next agenda item, 7.2, policy 1510, youth sponsorship. And Ms. Vanderkool, you're taking this one?
I am. Just trying to do two things at one time here. Here we are. There we go. So administration received a request from the Elnora Eagles U19B team for sponsorship as they go to the Western Canadian Softball Championship in Richmond, BC. As you are all aware, in rural Alberta, to get a team together like this, it takes players from the region, and sometimes those boundaries reside outside of Kneehill County. This is why back in July 2017, Council amended the policy so that teams that reside outside Kneehill County boundaries and that consist of Kneehill County residents, urban and rural, can be brought to Council directly for a decision instead of being automatically denied. There are 6 players out of the 13 who reside in Kneehill County on this team. There is currently $8,200 remaining in the budget for this youth sponsorship. Council's options are to approve the request for $500, approve a request in another amount, or to receive this request for information.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Vanderkool. Are there any questions for Ms. Vanderkool? Councillor Penner.
So I've been there, done that, when, like Ms. Vanderkeel said, you have to travel, not out of your county or whatever, so your child can participate on a team, and vice versa. That's happened over the years. So I'd like to make the motion that council approve a youth sponsorship in the amount of $500 to the Elnora Eagles U19 softball team.
Okay, we have a motion before us to approve a youth sponsorship in the amount of $500. Is there any discussion to that motion? I don't see any, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thanks, Carolyn. Uh, 7.3 is our next agenda item, and that is a scholarship program review. Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Reeve, to you and council. This is an item that was asked to be placed on the agenda by Councillor Cunningham. Councillor Cunningham came and asked administration about the approach for potentially making changes or requesting that council look at making changes to the youth scholarship, to the scholarship program. This, of course, is a council decision as to what direction you want to go there. But in the conversation between Councillor Cunningham and myself, it was felt that probably the most efficient and the best course of action was to place this on the agenda and for council to consider bringing this back at a committee of the whole meeting, where the policy could be, and potential changes of it could be discussed. And from there, the recommendation to alter it or not could be made to council after that discussion took place. So it does, this approach does allow for whatever discussion council wants to have. But with that background is perhaps now I'll turn it over to Councillor Cunningham for anything that she'd like to speak to on her item.
Hi, am I good here, Carolyn?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, great. I just never quite trust technology. So thanks to Council, Mr. Hogan, and administration for allowing me to bring forward this RFD for review of our Kneehill County Scholarship Program. Much appreciated. This item was brought to me by a Kneehill County resident whose child graduated with a high school diploma obtained outside of Canada, although the student maintained Kneehill County as their home residence. After this was brought to me, I was able to research multiple other scholarship policies from various counties in the province and other forms of scholarship opportunities. To date, in my research, Kneehill County was the only scholarship application which specifically outlined the applicant had to hold an Alberta high school diploma. We just if her high school diploma has been recognized in Alberta to obtain entrance to post-secondary education, I just would find it sufficient for our criteria as well. COVID has altered life for us in many ways. The shift has included education and the multitude of avenues to achieve higher education while evolving, expanding, and becoming more resilient with the changing ways we learn. As a mother of three myself, I came to understand that all three of my children had various learning styles. What was right and efficient for one was not the same for the others. The Rural Municipalities of Alberta Scholarship criteria states the applicant has a high school diploma. If obtained outside Canada, he or she may still be considered as long as the other requirements have been fulfilled. The RMA award is also open to applicants in their second year of post-secondary education who have never received this award. And just to let all Kneehill County students know that they are eligible to apply for the RMA scholarship. In the spring of 2022, Kneehill County Council and Administration adopted our strategic plan. In the quality of life section of the strategic plan, one of our goals adopted was to continue to be responsive to the needs of youth within the county. In my opinion, changing, involving, and improving the quality of life with resilience and openness with our stakeholders are pivotal components of our values as stated in our strategic plan. Thank you for taking the time to consider reviewing our scholarship policy and for allowing me this opportunity. And I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today.
Well, the audio side of your communications kind of cut in and out a little bit, but I do believe we've got the drift. Is there any discussion from council? Or what are council's wishes? Go ahead, Councillor Forbes.
More of a discussion aspect of it. Is it possible as a council to make the choice to consider this as a viable thing if someone does have it? I mean, my understanding is the student that we rejected was actually going to vet school here, so which we have a shortage of in this province. So can we consider that homeschooling education grade 12 outside? We could, as a council, include that as long as there wasn't, I guess I don't know how to put it. If you have an overabundance of actual residents, I mean, she lives here too, right? So she's not like she left the province to go do her schooling. She did it at her home. So I don't know. I think that opportunity needs to be given because there is different ways to get educated now.
Well, I think what we're looking at here is to bring it back to our committee of the whole to have that discussion rather than have it at a council. And I'm fairly certain we will have some more added information when we get it to the committee of the whole stage. So ultimately, I think what we're looking for is just whether or not we're interested in bringing this back to committee of the whole or not, I guess. Councillor McGee.
I appreciate when anyone on council has some ideas about how our policies maybe could be updated, and I think that a very wholesome presentation was met, and therefore I'd like to make the motion that we review the Kneehill County Scholarship Program at the September 20th Committee of the Whole meeting.
All righty, so we have a motion before us to bring this back to the Committee of the Whole meeting on September the 20th for further discussion. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. All righty, so September the 20th, we will have that discussion. Our next agenda item, 7.4, Kneehill Regional Partnership, Training and Projects, Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Reeve. Through you to council. This item that's before you is the annual item that comes forward from the Kneehill Regional Partnership. This is, of course, when the partnership goes out to its member municipalities and formally requests if there are any ideas for initiatives or regional training programs that the member municipalities would like the Kneehill Regional Partnership to consider. So just because something comes forward doesn't mean that the partnership is bound to actually consider it or follow up on it, but they are looking for ideas from their members as to what they feel would be of value or what would be of interest. The KRP is asking that that feedback be received by the end of August. That being said, council is free to put something forward to the Kneehill Regional Partnership at any time throughout the year. So this is a time when I've used that term that the partnership formally requests the information, but it doesn't mean that if an idea comes to us later that we can't bring it forward later. We still can, as long as it comes through the endorsement of council. So there's two parts to this. One is for any regional programs or projects. So if that's shared services or one-off projects, that would fall under that category. The second one is for any training programs. So as council will recall, we've conducted a number of orientation-related training elements. There's a disaster recovery and resiliency economic development one coming up. There's other ones coming up this year that have been outlined in the letters attached to the RFD, so I won't necessarily go through them, but they're more programs of that type. In 2023, it is the mandate of the Kneehill Regional Partnership that I'll use the term an orientation light type session occur. That'll be almost halfway, well, it won't be almost, it'll be halfway through the term. So that's part of the mandate of the KRP, is that they bring back for not a full orientation, but just a revisit of the orientation once councillors have been in the seats for a couple of years. So that was built into the terms of reference. So that already occurs. We don't need to put that forward. It's right there that it's a thing that's done. With that, administration will be continuing to discuss this internally if there are items that we want to put forward to council in terms of programs or shared services that we may want the region to consider. So if those are things along the lines of, say, a regional economic development officer or program, or elements within the planning domain, down the road that might include being able to do some financings regionally. All of those things are the types of projects that the partnership could consider. Some of those we're possibly in a position where we could move forward on, some of them we're not. But it's really just to pose the question to council if there's anything that springs to mind that you'd like to say, hey, let's investigate this. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's feasible or that the other partners are interested, but at least there might be the appetite there to take a look at it. The last point on this is that you'll notice that this is here a lot sooner than it has been in the last couple of years. That was a change that the Kneehill Regional Partnership made in terms of putting this out earlier in the year so that they could go through those projects and those programs take a look at what they were actually going to put forward, and then allow municipalities to build any necessary funding into their yearly budgets, rather than after the budget process and going back looking for additional money, allowing the partners to build that into the budget ahead of time. So just to facilitate that, that component of the project a bit more, we've seen the timeline on this request move up.
Council have any questions for Mr. Hogan? Or suggestions? Or motions? Go ahead, Mr. Hogan.
I was going to say, administration is going to have a follow-up conversation around this internally. So we may have some ideas to put forward to council at a later meeting. That won't meet the KRP's requested deadline. That being said, it's still allowed, and we can still put them forward. So there is that opportunity as well, that we could bring this back to a later meeting. With that, if there's nothing else at this time, then the recommended motions would change to that council simply accept the correspondence for information.
Councillor McGee.
I did have one suggestion, and I'm not sure if I know how to word it properly, so I might ask for the CAO to interpret me. But I think maybe some form of education around what our role as councils are for helping our region become economically viable. And so a little bit of what things do you consider that allows our area become beyond resilient, but actually prosperous? Does that make sense, or am I too vague?
Through Mr. Sorry, Councilor McGee, I was just writing that down so we could take a look at it. So I think the intent, we don't need all of the specifics in order to put the project forward, just a rough idea. So is it, you're looking beyond, say, an elected official's role in economic development, and looking more at
And more of a wholesome picture of what a diverse and forward-moving community looks like. So not solely economic development, but how the other factors create economic development.
Okay.
Or play a role in economic development.
If you're good with this, Councillor McGee, I think we could put that forward just as, for now, I think we could put that forward to the KRP with council's endorsement, just as economic development training for elected officials. And we can play around with that, and I don't mean play around with the idea itself, but play around with the wording of how that's put forward to the committee, understanding what you're looking for.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Christie.
I guess one of my thoughts, is there enough support for emergency services considered for post-traumatic syndrome with like the accident north of Trochu, where it was very violent, and are we doing enough to support the total fire department in some kind of program there?
Through Mr. Reeve to Councillor Christie, so the idea, we do offer, and I'm going to get the acronym or the phrase wrong, but basically a post-event mental health, and that's not what the actual title of it is, but it's basically debriefing for critical stress incidents. And so there is the question of formatting is there you'd be looking at potentially expanding that program in terms of how robust it is, or?
I guess my thought would be, should we be reactive or proactive? Do we need to have something before that happens? And there'd be some strength by having the Trochu department give some feedback to the rest of the departments. I mean, that was a very violent accident that happens, there's no doubt about it. I know when I was on victim services, we did put on 2 programs several years ago that were pretty well supported by our emergency services, and there's been nothing for a while.
If you'd like, Councillor Christie, we can put that forward as an item for critical stress management for emergency responders. And then when we bring that forward to the KRP, we could look at what programs are already in place and how those might be expanded or altered timing-wise, as you said.
I just think it might be very important to be proactive, not reactive. I appreciate the support that the first responders after that got, but whether they need more training before it happens.
Yeah, so we would define that not necessarily as critical stress debriefing, but just critical stress management.
Because you talked more about preparation as well, yeah.
And if I may, we might put that sounds to me like that might actually be, you're looking more at having that as a program rather than say a one-off training. Is I'd probably recommend if I'm understanding what you're putting forward, then you're probably looking at a longer-term ongoing program that we establish and.
Yeah, no, I think it's important that we have it in place ongoing. Like, part of it, we're bringing in volunteers that really don't know what they're getting into till it happens, and then they're in trouble.
Yeah. So if council chose to endorse that, I think I'd recommend we put that under the project component rather than the training component.
Okay, sounds good to me.
So that would be covered under the first motion, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Deputy Reeve King.
So just kind of help me get it clear in my head, Councillor Christie. So this is kind of a project, ongoing program that we'd want to put in place for first responders. It's going to need some funding. And so we would be proposing, along with this project, some kind of funding model that would cover the cost of providing the support required.
I know that when we put it on through victim services, we funded it, and whether there's an access to some of that funding through victim services, I don't know that at this point. But I know there's funding there available on grants, or was. I don't know now what's available. Because we brought in a couple of pretty high-end speakers back in the day, but that was funded through victim services. Whether the municipalities need to fund that or whether there's grants available, I'm not sure of that at this point in time.
Through Mr. Reeve, that'd be something we'd have to explore as part of putting it together, because this is an item that we are doing some things now, so we'd have to go back and put that exploration document together. Once the KRP looked at it, then that's when those funding requests would come back to the municipalities or be built into the budget process.
Deputy Reeve King.
I guess because my brain's not working too clear today, is there a funding mechanism already in place to fund the partnership and the programs? So can you just clarify that for me, please?
Through Mr. Reeve, there's a per capita funding that's provided to the partnership yearly from each of the members. And so the partnership does have a budget that it can use for some projects. Primarily, in the last couple of years, the partnership's been using that to pay for the training that they've been putting on, which is why there hasn't been a cost to the municipalities to attend that training. It's being covered through that partnership budget. For projects, the partnership has a choice, as they can choose to fund that through their budget should they have room, or they can choose to make a request to the municipalities to contribute additional funding for those specific projects. That has been the course over the last couple of years that they've been choosing to do. So as an example, the fire levels of service project that we're doing, each of the municipalities is paying for that above and beyond their per capita share to the KRP. So the KRP makes a recommendation whether they'll cover that project cost or make a request to the municipalities as to put that in. Part of that request is based on what funding mechanism they determine, whether that's, say, a per capita rate or a percentage share or anything like that. So they're, depending on the program or the nature of it, is you may see an additional request come back above the per capita funding. What that would be really depends on the project and doing some research on what it might actually be and what the estimated cost is.
Councillor McGee?
Can I add to that answer? I think what we're looking at right now is ideas, and part of the process then is we'll do exploration of those ideas, which would include what we could see as funding and funding opportunities. So we're not going to be approving any of those projects till that's thoroughly presented. So that if we do then end up seeing a huge funding issue, that would be part of the decision of whether or not we as a council then say, yeah, let's still agree that the partnership does that.
Deputy Reeve King.
And I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that I wouldn't be supportive of going in this direction. I just have a concern regarding, so each municipality has the right to choose to either participate in a potential training program or a potential project or not. And so I guess my concern is that if we're going to have a partnership, we need partners that are committed to participate. And I know as we increase the amount of dollars that we're asking for from some of our partners, their continued participation gets less and less enthusiastic. And so I'm not saying we shouldn't go forward with this. In fact, I'm very supportive of the idea of what you're suggesting, Councillor Christie. I think it's very important. And I'm just concerned that concerned about the funding aspects of it, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I'm sorry, I'm not very clear about where I'm trying to go with it. So anyway, that's my concern, is that in order to be a partnership and to move forward, we need to have a commitment of the partners to that partnership, and we need to have a commitment. So if we're going to try to support our first responders, our fire departments, the individuals who are serving our community in the way that need this kind of support, I'd really like to see all the communities participate in something like this, rather than a piecemeal kind of approach.
Mr. Hogan.
Through Mr. Reeve to Deputy Reeve King, I think that's a concern that the partnership has shared in terms of wanting to make it easier for members to participate in programs, because the funding component has come up on other discussions. And I think that we're seeing this request at this point in the year is part of the response to that, because under what we were doing prior to this is the partnership would send out these letters near the end of the year. And so a number of municipalities were already into their budget process or had already adopted their budget. And then the partnership would come back saying, and now we want to explore this, this, and this. And it becomes an additional funding request on an already approved budget. And so that's, I think that, well, not I think, municipal members did convey that that was causing issues with participation. So I don't think that moving the timeline is necessarily the 100% solution to that, but it was a request, or I think it was done, well, I know it was done to facilitate the members being able to take that cost and then now include it in their municipal budgets so that it wasn't an additional ask after the fact. And that's why we're seeing the timing shift to make it, to enable and make it easier for those members to take part in projects.
Go ahead. Deputy Reeve King.
So part of my concern related to this funding aspect is that I know I'm involved with a certain task force that has a funding commitment attached to it based on direction from the regional partnership. And I know to be successful in what we've been asked to do, there is a funding component that's needed there. And as some of the partners remove themselves from participation within that specific task force that's been established, it shifts the cost of maintaining the viable service onto the partners who stay within. The unfortunate thing is that all the partners receive benefit, whether they participate in that or not. And so there's a fairness component that's frustrating me at this point in time because of the task force that I'm on. And I recognize that some of the commitments we are being asked to make on a long-term basis are going to be much harder to sustain without full participation of all members within the Kneehill partnership. And so that's a concern I have, is long-term, how we're going to maintain some of these programs and directions that we've set as a partnership without full participation by all those partners. And it is a big concern to me. So anyway, I'll leave that where it is, and I think you have an understanding of the concern I have, and I think that if we're going to commit to a program that's going to require especially an ongoing component to it, that we need that ongoing commitment by all the partners to fund those kind of projects. So.
I would totally agree with your assessment, Deputy Reeve King. Okay, so where are we at? Someone want to make some motions? We want to keep the discussion open? Where do you want to go with this? Deputy Reeve King.
Since no one else is jumping in on this, Carolyn, if you just hold that for a moment, I'll make the motion then that council provide the Kneehill Regional Partnership with the following idea for potential regional project, which is the critical stress management for first responders.
Okay, we have a motion before us to provide one of the...
Thank you, Carolyn.
Training projects as presented on screen. Are we good with that motion the way it sits, Mr. Hogan?
Just that it's not a training program, but it's a regional program.
Regional program. Okay, potential regional, yep. We good there?
I believe that we are.
Okay. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. And we have Councillor Penner?
Yep. I'll make the second motion. I look forward to actually participating in some of these other training initiatives that have been slated. later in the year here, but I'd like to see us add that council provide the Kneehill Regional Partnership with ideas, just saying, that we should add economic development training for the elected officials. That would be my suggestion to add to the training component of it.
Okay, so just to amend the municipal training to 2023 member ideas to add ECDev training. Okay, is there any discussion to that motion? I see none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously, and I have been requested to call a break, so we are in recess. All right, everyone's back. We will bring the meeting back to order. Our next agenda item is 7.5, broadband letter of support. Mr. Hogan, I believe.
Through you, Mr. Reeve, to council, this is a letter of request we've received from another municipality, that being the county of Paint Earth. They're taking the lead on behalf of a few other municipal partners in attempting to lobby the minister and through the minister of the provincial government to create a provincial funding envelope for rural broadband. And this, so council is aware of the UBF is a Universal Broadband Fund that was put out as a grant. Of course, that was for shovel-ready projects and things of that nature. Where they're looking at here, the group of municipalities being involved in this is saying, you know what, rather than a one-time grant thing, just make a funding envelope that people can access on an ongoing basis to contribute and enhance rural broadband in the area. There are a few things that are out there that I think is worth the county's exploration. But for that, we don't necessarily need a specific project. What's in front of us right now is simply seeing, hey, we want to send this letter. Does Kneehill County want their name on the underside? Administration's recommendation is that we support the request. There's no financial implication to us to support the request. I do believe that rural broadband is, well, again, I keep using that term today, that I believe, when it's things that I know because it's in your strategic plan and other areas, that for economic development purposes, for preserving rural quality of life, for all of those things, that broadband is increasingly important. Council's had that discussion before, so based on that, I think it's in alignment that, which is why I'm recommending that council support the what is essentially a generic request to the province to create a dedicated broadband funding stream so that rural broadband can continue to be developed within the province.
Any questions from council to Mr. Hogan? Oh, yes, go ahead, Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you. This is quite timely because I apologize for my not great internet. So yeah, I'm all for this. But I'm just wondering, I can't remember the date, but I believe it was in the spring that we had put forward a rural broadband study, and I'm just wondering, like, have we got that back, or where that stands?
Through Mr. Reeve, that was through a project with the Kneehill Regional Partnership to look at that. Given some of the staffing capacities that we've had, that project has stalled a bit.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm all for this. It feels like since the minute I even got on council, like this has been a topic, and I appreciate the County of Paint Earth putting this forward, and I really hope the province starts listening to this because it's an obvious concern to all of us in rural Alberta. So I'm all for this.
Councillor Penner.
So if nobody else has any comments, or I guess you could add them after I make the motion, that I'd make the motion that council support the request for a provincial broadband funding envelope.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a motion before us to support Paint Earth's request. There's a number of municipalities that have put their name forward to help support this, and I think it's important that the province understands that you can't have a shovel-ready project if you do not understand, or if you don't have the capacity to get there. So I think this is important that we support them and have the funding available to move forward in steps. And I think that's what this is moving forward to, is it not, Mr. Hogan?
Mr. Reeve, that would be the idea, is that there's some dedicated provincial funding stream so that, you know, when we regain some of our staffing capacities and move that study that even we're a part of forward, that whatever comes out of that, there's a pool of funding available for us to access to actually turn it from a study to a reality.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a motion before us to support Paint Earth's letter. Is there any discussion to that motion? And I see none. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. All right, our next agenda item will be 7.6, electoral boundaries. That was brought before us, so the information has not been pre-circulated. So, Mr. Hogan, are you presenting?
Through Mr. Reeve, I can start off. As I believe council is aware, the federal government is conducting a electoral district boundary review. This is part of a normal process that's undertaken every 10 years. So they have created groups within each province to look at the boundaries within that province. This again is based on the designated number of seats that each province will have at the federal level, based on population. And so they are proposing some changes to the electoral districts within Alberta. Kneehill County would be impacted by some of these changes. In the material that has been distributed to you, you do see the maps of what is the current electoral boundary versus what is the proposed electoral boundary. And so you can see the different, where right now we're split among 2 electoral districts, that being Bow River and Battle River Crowfoot. You can see that under the proposed one, we would be completely within the 1 electoral district, so no longer split over 2. There is some opportunity for council to provide feedback into this and to what our take on that would be. If we see positives to that change, if we see negatives to that change, based on the, you know, whether that's the geographical area or trade routes or flows, anything like that. When the federal government does look at these, they tend to look within a population formula. That population formula, plus minus 25%, has been endorsed as a standard by the Supreme Court of Canada. That doesn't mean that you can't go outside of that, but generally there needs to be some sort of reason or acceptable or legitimate reason to deviate from that. That being said, in looking at the ward boundaries, is the believe that what has been proposed has been tighter than that, so there might be some room there. But really, I think the questions before council is, what do you look at or what do you feel about the proposed revisions? And based on that, is there some added process that you want to undertake, such as appearing before the committee and or before the group that's looking at these to make a presentation in support or against what's being proposed?
Councillor McGee.
Thank you. I appreciate being able to put this on the agenda. I apologize for the rush. The challenging part, I didn't get into this deep enough until after talking to a few other people at a few functions I was at. And once I dove into this past weekend, I learned that our request to be in front of the commission with our concerns the deadline was yesterday. And so I kind of went beyond what is normal, proper process, and I put in the request as a public voter as opposed to as a councilman, and gave notice that I am bringing this forward to council to see if that would be also included in my presentation. I want to be clear that I know that that was a stretch to do, but because of the deadline, I thought that was better than missing it. And I am very willing to fully withdraw as well if that is what council would prefer to see happen. I really feel as though this is something that really needs to be spoke to. I think we are seeing all levels of government, both provincial and especially federal, taking more and more out of the rural areas that does not accommodate the populace that we have here. They do not factor in all the other factors that affect having a populace here, and certainly the fact that I believe the ratio is somewhat close to 80% of the economics come out of the rural areas, yet we have such little political representation. And so population alone isn't enough, and I think the variance needs to be challenged, and we need to give good reasons why it needs to be challenged. So I'd like to have that discussion. I'd like to also say that I want you to be, I would like to suggest that we then also consider putting this on the committee of the whole meeting after, if we decide to go forward. I would put together what I would suggest that I would bring forward to that commission for you to approve word by verbatim, pretty much.
Although Bow River is a large constituency as it is, when you look at the proposed map of Bow River, you're looking at 2 or 3 tankfuls of gas and a couple hotel stays to get across this constituency. And are we going to get representation when this constituency is that large? And ultimately, from what I see of it, it is all rural. Unless I'm reading the map wrong. Is some of Lethbridge in?
Lethbridge has their own boundaries, I believe. Yep.
Didn't they drag in? Haven't they pulled in Innisfail into this now?
Innisfail, Bowden,
have.
from what Martin was telling me.
Yep. I'm very passionate about this being a very important thing that we have to scream about. I think FCM has brought us a long ways in understanding Western Alberta or Western province needs, but still the density versus the need for rural and isolated areas is so not understood. And I think now that I'm horribly confident that we can make a huge impact, I think the conversation has to be made and it has to be fought for at least the next time as well. So it's not just for what we can do today for these boundaries, but it's also what we can do for the next time that this is under review, that we have a good communication started about the things that are being missed when they consider these boundaries. So it's to be noted that the commission has the right to have a variance of 25% from what the ratio quota would be. The quota has been named at 115,206 people. Alberta government had requested the commission to not go beyond 5%, is how I understand it. And I find 5% really too low. I'd like to see the full 25% variance if it's justified, but the fact that we are even in an area that they are now putting at a plus, so we've taken on even additional people within that 5% as opposed to less people, and that, to me, that's way the wrong direction.
Councillor Christie.
The only thing I see that's positive is Alberta's getting 4 new districts. That's the only
Yeah,
better.
but they're also making the House of Commons larger.
I know, but we're getting three of the four that they're adding, so that's just a step in the right direction. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but at least we have more representation in the House.
Yeah. I got a comment to that, but I'm not gonna say it out loud. Well, I think it's probably a good idea to express our concerns to the Electoral's Boundaries Commission, but it's the province who's made the decision that plus or minus 5% is the number. Go ahead, Councillor McGee.
So that begs the question as a part two, and let's do one step at a time, but I really think it'd be something to consider that we then in additional down the road meeting, think about whether or not we want to challenge RMA or FCM to speak to this as well. Just as far as our province having the 5%, how that's just really short-sighted of our needs. And they're all about economic development. So that economic development piece and economic prosperity of rural Alberta is a very strong factor in how we could argue this, in my opinion.
Well, ultimately, economic development does start in the rural areas, and that's what pushes the province ahead. But we get no credit for it.
And you know, we can get to the petty details of examples. We've talked about some of our concerns with our medical system and our emergency services systems, and all those things are becoming more and more centralized and outside of so the needs of our populace for their basic needs is being highly affected because the people making those decisions are not really aware of what those factors are and how impacting those factors are. And so to me, if we're going to start allowing the election to even indicate that that's an acceptable thing to do, we're going to be headed spiraling down very fast to having even a worse situation, is my fear.
Deputy Reeve King.
So let me ask a question. When would this presentation be made?
I've requested to be at the presentation that will be in Drumheller on September 22nd, 2 days after our next COW meeting.
So I guess I'm just wondering how far you could push this in that limited time frame. So certainly within council, I think we could have a discussion. Are we going to be able to take it much farther than that? You had referenced RMA and other, so I'm just wondering.
I think the RMA and the FCM pieces is something we could do further down the road. I'd rather worry about the commission at this time and then just have that on the back burner that do we need to consider getting that to our advocates as well.
Thank you.
Would you happen to know, Mr. Hogan, are there other municipalities that are putting together any submissions to go before this electoral commission?
Through you, Mr. Reeve, I don't know if there are or not. It's not a discussion that, in my conversations with colleagues, it's not a discussion that's come up. So
Okay.
there may or may not be, I don't know.
I don't know if it's worthwhile reinventing the wheel if there's somebody out there that's already headed in that direction. Maybe we could partner with their thoughts, or I think possibly being in contact with RMA may give us an idea if there are any other municipalities that are willing to put forward a submission and what that submission would include. I know when it comes down to equal vote, one ratepayer, one vote, it kind of tells you that nobody's supposed to be special, but yet you look at the 116,000 people per constituency, there aren't that many 116,000 people per constituency which are rural. The majority of them will be urban, and urbans do have different needs than rural municipalities and rural people. It's not just rural municipalities.
I also think the other factor that is worth discussing is my MP is going to have to work really hard. And how do we get people to be MPs for such an enormous job? It's an insanely enormous job in comparison to having a nice little part of the city. And in that, I think it's been proven, and I'd love to find facts to back this up, but we have rural people are much more engaged in all these processes with discussing things with their MPs. And so, again, to make it even more challenging for them to do that, that's handicapping our voice. And I just think there's many arguments that could be made, and so I will find what resources are available. I'm willing to work with administration to find some good arguments and then go from there.
Well, we're lucky we do have a MP in our constituency who is very well traveled, and he does spend time with all his constituents. But he's getting tired, I think.
Go to an hour meeting and it's a 6-hour drive there and back. You waste a lot of time.
Yeah.
And through some of the conversation, I understand that a lot of the city MPs don't do those types of visits. So again, that even thinking of that being a factor wouldn't be there because they don't do those kinds of things to connect with their populace.
Well, it's easier for them to come to the MP because he's close than it is for our residents to try to find him, let alone come to him. So I don't know, what would we like to do here? Are you suggesting something, Councillor McGee?
I guess we could put this in a form of motion if you can keep up with me there, Carolyn. I should have pre-wrote it, I apologize. I'd like to move that I work with administration to put together possible points to bring to the commission as a representative of Kneehill County. That will be discussed and approved, not approved, I guess, discussed and shared at the next committee of the whole meeting. How does that sound? CAO, if you have any ideas of how to better word that, I would love to hear them.
Through Mr. Reeve to Councillor McGee, I'm just taking in the motion as you've worded it and just formulating if there's any alterations that we'd recommend. And I think if we want to, we know what the intent of what we're going to do is. We could also leave this just as that the council direct this item to be placed on an upcoming agenda. Or that the council direct that draft points be developed for discussion at an upcoming meeting. And if we go just to an upcoming meeting, I guess one of the questions that I've got is the discussions focused on the committee of the whole, And I guess my question would be if that's just a timing issue or leaving the capacity to actually do the thing. The only concern that I'd have there, and it's more administrivia than real concern, is at a committee of the whole meeting, you are a committee, you can't actually endorse that as a council, right? Of course, the following council meeting will be too late, I think, if I look at the calendar. So that leaves the earlier council meeting of, I think, the 13th or 16th.
Yeah, of course, I'd be quite willing to do that if administration is willing. Yeah.
I think that there'd be some, and that's why I'm phrasing this as an upcoming meeting rather than specifying. We do know that it's got to happen prior to the committee hearing, so there is a timeliness there. But if we can do it for September 13th, then it actually gives the 7 of you the ability to formally endorse it as a council, as opposed to just taking what we come up with for information at a committee of the whole.
Thank you. I like that. And so then the first motion would be better just to request Councillor McGee, approve Councillor McGee representing Kneehill County to the commission for September 22nd, because I do need to give them an answer about what this meeting says about that sooner than the next council meeting.
Yes, and I agree. I think that's an appropriate discussion for council to have, because you're doing two things through that motion and that discussion. The first is generally the reeve, and if in the absence of the reeve, the deputy reeve or the speakers are the spokespersons of council. So one is the endorsement that in this case it would be one of the councillors representing the county on this front, and that's, if council decides to go that route, that's perfectly fine. And so but that council's making that endorsement as to going that route. The second one is that as a council function, you're just giving approval for that to take place in general, whether it's the reeve or anybody else. So I think if there were two motions there that if council is comfortable with Councillor McGee taking the lead on this, you can make that motion. The council approve Councillor McGee to speak on behalf of Kneehill County and we'll figure out the exact name of the commission or commission meeting. That could be the first motion, and the second one would be directing us to place this on the upcoming council agenda for discussion.
So for clarity, and I might need to repeat this, if there's a way to have our reeve go instead of myself, I'm really willing to do that too, because again, I'm uncomfortable with the fact that I jumped to this so briskly, but the timeline just, I sent the letter yesterday, like it's, so I apologize for it just happens to be something I feel very passionate about, and I'm willing to take on if the reeve feels it's something he would be willing to pass on.
So the reeve has just left the meeting for a little bit, and he asked me to step in his place, so see, we're still crafting away here. There, he's back before we crafted the motion, so good. It's the Federal Electoral Boundaries Commission.
So reeve, I just
Electoral boundaries, sorry.
mentioned.
Just a minute, Councillor McGee, if you were just. There we go. Boundaries.
Oh. So Reeve, I just reiterated to the council for their awareness that I most certainly would be willing to request that you appear in my place if that's something you'd prefer as our official spokesperson. I certainly don't want to be someone who's been hijacking what is proper process.
I don't mind.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a motion. Okay, so so we have a motion that's on screen. Oh, I guess I'll have to read it out for Councillor Cunningham. Move that council approve the Reeve and/or any interested councillor represent Kneehill County at the Federal Electoral Boundaries Commission for Alberta. Is that motion has been made? Okay. Is there any discussion to that motion? I think it's good that we have someone there to speak to it. It's important for us as a rural entity to have our voices heard. That being said, we'll see where it goes from there. Okay.
So before we vote on that, so we're not approving the attendance of a bunch of individuals. We're going to approve the attendance of potentially one. So would it be all right to amend that motion to read that council approve the Reeve and/or a designated councillor represent Kneehill County? Just take away the any interested and change that to a designated councillor. Would that be an okay amendment with you, Councillor McGee, since it's your motion?
Yes, I think that's very appropriate. Thank you.
Because really what our intent is that we would be sending one person to represent us.
Okay, just a question, and I haven't had time to go through all the information that's been presented. Is this open to the public, these meetings? I know you'd have to be listed as someone to speak, but
Yeah.
Is the public open to come in and listen? Yeah, but whether you're registered or whether you can come as just an interested ratepayer.
So that is something we would need to conduct the research on that to give council an actual verifiable answer.
Mm-hmm.
My thought would be, my impression on what I've seen is that yes, it would be, but I don't want to confirm that answer for council because I'm not sure it's correct.
Okay, I'm still wordsmithing your motion, Councillor McGee. So if you could go to the first line, Carolyn, since you've adjusted the second line, and council approved the attendance of the Reeve, and then the rest of it's okay. So what we're basically saying is we're going to approve the attendance of either our Reeve or a designated councillor to attend the Federal Electoral Boundaries Commission of Alberta, for Alberta. So we're basically giving them permission to travel and be there on our behalf and to speak on our behalf. Am I correct in my understanding?
Yeah, that's how I understand it, that now when I talk, I'm talking for all of us. And I just looked up the public participation, and they're calling it a public hearing, and you must send notice if you're going to speak. So I think it is open to everybody by the way they word it. So to make a present representation at the public hearing, you must send a notice. They just call it a public hearing, so for me, that says everyone welcome.
Okay, so you don't have to pre-register as an attendant unless you're willing to, or wanting to speak. Okay, so I will now read the motion again for the benefit of Councillor Cunningham. Move that council approve the attendance of the Reeve and or a designate councillor representative from Kneehill County at the Federal Electoral Boundaries Commission for Alberta. Okay, is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing as not, is it appropriate to call the question? Well, I will anyway. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And what do we got? We got another motion?
Yep.
Councillor Penner.
I'll make the motion that council direct administration to place the federal boundary amendments discussion on the September 13th, 2022 agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a motion to place the federal boundaries amendments discussions onto the September 13th, 2022 agenda. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Okay, that brings us to our next agenda item, which is council and committee reports. Sorry, I didn't add, I just wanted to do a little bit of a verbal update on Aqua 7. Aqua 7's been running all right, but I do believe, what was it, 3 weeks ago, Mr. Hogan, that there was an issue with some magnesium depopulating off the pipe and entering the water system due to a high volume of water draws.
Sorry.
It's not it's a cosmetic problem. It wasn't a health problem. I think that's been subsided, but if there was a bit of yellowish, brownish material, that was just a magnesium. And did we ever find out where the high volume water draws were coming from? Were they fracking a well, or we don't know?
Through Mr. Reeve, not to that level. Okay. As to what the ultimate end source was. But yeah, the rest of the statement in terms of there being some manganese that was left that gets scoured from the pipes when those flow is on there. The Aqua 7 and of course the county manages Aqua 7 both on the ground and at the governance level, reporting to the administratively at the governance level. Obviously, there's a board. But having that, responding to that and being able to flush that line to get it out there, all of that was being done in conjunction with Alberta Environment and confirming that the numbers we were seeing were an aesthetic issue, not an ongoing health issue.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that forward. I know on our county line, the Selkirk line, I didn't notice any issues with discoloration of the water, but I think Bicycle Irkana had some issues there. Carbon did?
Yeah, most of the municipalities along the line had some form of...
Okay. Maybe I didn't look close enough. But anyway, just wanted to bring that up. That there are no other council committee reports from what I gather. So I guess if we could have a motion just to accept for information as presented. Deputy Reeve King.
I'd make the motion to accept council and committee reports as presented for information.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion to accept as presented. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Council follow-up action list. Is there anything that strikes somebody's eye? Counselor Christie.
If there's nothing in discussion, I'll move that we accept the council follow-up action list as information.
Okay, we have a motion to receive for information as presented. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. Call the question. All those in favor? And it is carried unanimously. That brings us to the end of our open session. We do not have a closed session. Yes, Councillor Penner.
Just wanted to put out a reminder that the county has a fire ban on, commencing yesterday. So there is a fire ban in effect.
So we've joined the town of Three Hills, have we? Yeah, but I've been watching the weather on our local channels, and Three Hills has been mentioned for a number of weeks that they are under a fire ban, and I think I know why, but. Okay, so if that is everything, I will adjourn the meeting at 10:53. Thank you, everyone.